Commander Zixthala had seen many species in her 40 cycles of service to the hegemony. The proud Kethmar with their crystalline exoskeletons, the ethereal Velnari who existed partially in hyperspace, the brutish Gorkon who could punch through starship hulls with their bare fists. But this creature called human was unlike anything in the galactic database. The specimen sat in the center of the detention cell, wrists bound by quantum-locked restraints that could hold a rampaging Gorkon. The energy field surrounding him hummed with enough power to vaporize most organic matter on contact. Yet the human appeared relaxed, almost bored. Specimen designation: Human 7749. Zixthala spoke into her recording device, her 4 eyes, studying the creature intently. Subject appears calm despite capture. Note: may indicate primitive cognitive function or shock-induced stupor. The human looked up at her observation deck and smiled. Actually smiled. The gesture sent an uncomfortable chill through her chitinous frame. Dr. Veltar, the hegemony's chief xenobiologist, scuttled closer on his 8 legs. Commander, the initial scans are peculiar. This creature's physiology is remarkably inefficient. Slow reflexes, limited sensory range, fragile bone structure. Yet their ship destroyed 3 of our cruisers before we managed to disable it, Zixthala finished grimly. Continue your analysis, Doctor. The Council wants answers. Below in the cell, Captain Sarah Chen of the UES Defiant tested the quantum restraints for the dozenth time. The aliens had been thorough. The bonds were indeed unbreakable by conventional means. The energy field was lethal. The cell walls were constructed from some kind of adaptive metamaterial that shifted to counter any force applied against it. Unfortunately for her captors, Sarah Chen hadn't become humanity's youngest deep space captain by thinking conventionally. She began to hum, softly at first, then with growing confidence. An old Earth song her grandmother had taught her, something about a mockingbird. Dr. Veltar's antenna twitched. Commander, the creature is producing rhythmic vocalizations. Some form of distress call, perhaps? Monitor all frequencies, Zixthala ordered. Ensure no signals are being transmitted. But Sarah wasn't trying to transmit anything. She was simply remembering what her xenoanthropology professor had taught her about first contact scenarios. Every species builds their technology around their own psychological and physiological limitations. Find the assumption, find the weakness. The hegemony clearly valued order, uniformity, predictability. Their ship designs were perfect geometric forms. Their restraint systems were marvels of over-engineering. Even their language followed rigid mathematical patterns she'd been analyzing since her capture. They had built their prison for beings like themselves. Logical, methodical, predictable. They hadn't built it for a human. Sarah stopped humming and began to laugh. Not the bitter laugh of despair, but genuine amusement. The sound echoed strangely in the cell's perfect acoustics. The creature exhibits erratic behavior, Dr. Veltar reported nervously. Possibly psychological breakdown. Sarah stood up, the quantum restraints allowing limited movement. She walked to the energy field barrier and pressed her face close to it, still grinning. "You know what's funny?" she called out in perfect hegemony standard. She'd learned their language during the 3-day chase before her capture. "You've built the perfect prison for yourselves." Zixthala leaned forward. The creature could speak? This changed everything. "You see," Sarah continued, beginning to pace within her confined space, "your entire civilization is built on the assumption that intelligence equals predictability. that any sufficiently advanced being would think like you do, follow the same logical patterns, value the same things. She paused at the cell's center, looking directly up at the observation deck. But humans? We're the opposite of predictable. We're the species that throws logic out the airlock and does the impossible, just to prove it can be done. We're the ones who looked at evolution's perfectly good four-limb design and said, nah, let's walk on just two and use the other two for something crazy like art and music and building spaceships. Dr. Veltar's translator struggled with several of the concepts. Art? Music? These terms had no direct equivalent in hegemony culture. Sarah reached into her boot. The guards had been thorough, but not thorough enough, and pulled out what appeared to be a simple metal paperclip. Standard issue aboard human vessels for the amusingly low-tech purpose of resetting electronic systems when sophisticated solutions failed. Your quantum locks are beautiful, she said, examining the restraints. Probably took your best engineers decades to perfect. Unbreakable by any known force in the galaxy. She began straightening the paperclip. Except you forgot about unknown forces. Zixthala watched in growing alarm as the human inserted the primitive metal tool into what appeared to be a decorative groove on the restraint cuff. Impossible. Those locks cannot be... The restraints fell to the floor with a soft clink. You designed these to resist every conceivable form of attack, Sarah explained, rubbing her wrists. Electromagnetic, kinetic, thermal, quantum fluctuation. But you never considered that someone might just pick the lock. Because in your perfectly logical universe, why would anyone use a primitive method when sophisticated ones exist? The energy field still contained her, but Sarah was no longer concerned. She walked to the wall and began examining its surface with her fingers. Adaptive metamaterial, she mused. Responds to applied force by becoming stronger in the opposite direction. Brilliant, really. Hit it, and it becomes harder. Try to melt it, and it becomes more heat-resistant. She pressed her palm flat against the wall and began to push. Not hard, not with any particular force, but with a strange, rhythmic motion. Almost like... She's massaging it, Dr. Veltar whispered in disbelief. The wall began to shimmer, its adaptive matrix confused by the gentle, non-threatening pressure. The material had no protocol for responding to something that wasn't quite an attack, but wasn't quite harmless either. A section of the wall simply dissolved. Alarms began blaring. Throughout the detention level, security forces mobilized. Zixthala screamed orders into her communicator, but Sarah Chen was already gone, vanished into the ventilation system. Another inefficiency the hegemony had built into their ships because their own physiology demanded perfect atmospheric circulation. 3. Hours later, the UES Defiance engines came back online. The hegemony task force found themselves facing a ship that should have been permanently disabled, commanded by a prisoner who should have been securely contained. As the human vessel disappeared into hyperspace, leaving the hegemony fleet confused and humiliated, Zixthala stared at the empty detention cell. The quantum restraints lay neatly on the floor. The energy field generator was undamaged. The wall had already reformed itself. On her desk, she found a handwritten note in hegemony standard. Thanks for the hospitality. Next time, try chains made of something stronger than assumptions. Captain S. Chen, humanity's least predictable. Export, Dr. Veltar approached nervously. Commander, how do we report this to the Council? How do we explain that our most secure facility was compromised by a paper clip and a back rub? Zixthala finished wearily. Doctor, I suggest we begin a complete review of our security protocols, and perhaps we should reconsider our first contact procedures with this species called humanity. In the depths of space, Sarah Chen smiled as she piloted her ship toward Earth. The galaxy was full of species who had perfected logic, efficiency, and predictability. It was time they met one that had perfected being beautifully, chaotically, impossibly human.